Hey, dear members of the Soul Stories family. Today we will bring you a romantic love story, so let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Chapter 1. The Fateful Encounter. That morning in the bustling city, the sun had just peeked out from behind the towering buildings, casting a faint golden glow over the streets. Emily Parker, a 25-year-old girl with neatly tied-up brown hair, pedaled her rickety old bicycle, weaving swiftly through the crowded flow of people. In the basket of her bike, two steaming cups of coffee were carefully balanced on a flimsy paper tray. Emily didn't stand out in the crowd, petite, with a delicate face that always carried a hint of worry. She worked at Bean Haven, a small coffee shop tucked away in a quiet alley, where the clientele mostly consisted of office workers and a few who cherished the calm. Her meager salary went almost entirely toward hospital bills for Ethan, her 17-year-old brother, who suffered from a terminal illness, a condition that had confined him to a hospital bed for more than half his life. For Emily, every day was a race, against time, against bills, and against the exhaustion weighing on her heart. Not far away, at a more upscale corner of the street, Alexander King leaned against his sleek black Bentley, his sharp, icy gaze scanning the stream of traffic. At 30, he was the epitome of success. CEO of King Enterprises, a massive real estate conglomerate, and the sole heir to the prestigious King family. Tall and striking, with chiseled features and deep blue eyes like a winter sea, he exuded an arrogance that kept people at a distance. The white suit he wore that day, tailored to perfection, radiated the aura of a powerful yet solitary man. Alexander had grown up in a sprawling mansion where everything was flawless, except for the warmth of family. His grandfather, Henry King, the last remaining elder of the lineage, constantly pressured him to marry to settle down and carry on the family tradition. To Alexander, love was a luxury he neither needed nor desired in his world of wealth and prestige. Fate, as if playing a cruel joke, brought these two opposites together in a moment neither could have anticipated. Emily, rushing to deliver her order on time, didn't notice Alexander blocking her path as she sped through the intersection. The screech of brakes pierced the air, her bike wobbled, and then, crash, the tray in her hands tipped over, spilling both scalding cups of coffee onto Alexander's pristine white suit. A brown stain spread across his chest, the aroma of coffee mingling with the morning air. Emily leapt off her bike in a panic, her trembling hands fumbling with a crumpled tissue from her pocket to wipe the mess. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I swear. I'll pay for your suit. I... Her voice stumbled over itself, her wide eyes brimming with guilt, but also a flicker of confusion, as she realized the man before her was no ordinary customer. That suit was undoubtedly worth more than she made in a month. Alexander glanced down at the stain, then lifted his gaze, his cold blue eyes locking onto hers. He didn't speak immediately, only curling his lips into a faint, mocking smile. "Do you think spilling coffee on me is a way to get my attention?" His voice was low and cutting, slicing through the air. "If you're trying to approach me, I'm afraid you've chosen the wrong method." Emily froze, her panic morphing into anger. She straightened up, though she barely reached his shoulder, and shot back without hesitation. "Get your attention? You think everyone's dying to get close to an arrogant guy like you? I'm just doing my job, not putting on some act." Her words were sharp, though her voice trembled with embarrassment and strain. A few passers-by paused, curious about the scene. A small girl in a coffee shop apron squaring off against a man clearly from the upper crust. Alexander raised an eyebrow, unaccustomed to defiance. "Doing your job? Then next time, watch where you're going so others don't suffer for your clumsiness." He turned to leave, but Emily wasn't backing down. "Suffer? A suit can be cleaned, but what about me losing a customer? Who's worse off here?" she shouted after him, her tone a mix of frustration and reluctant humor. He stopped, turning back to look at her once more. This time, a flicker of surprise crossed his eyes. Few dared to argue with Alexander King, and the way Emily blended clumsiness with quick wit made him unconsciously commit her face to memory, though he'd never admit it. "You'd better be more careful next time," he said coldly, ending the exchange before stepping into his car, leaving Emily standing there with her bike in a simmering irritation. At home, Emily recounted the story to Ethan, joking and sighing in turn. I bet that guy's never had to worry about money a day in his life. Talk about living in the clouds. Ethan managed a weak laugh from his hospital bed, his eyes lighting up thanks to her optimism. For her, her little brother was the only reason to keep going, no matter how harsh life became. Meanwhile, Alexander sat in his lavish office, gazing out at the city from the 50th floor, the image of that clumsy girl briefly crossing his mind. He dismissed it at once, telling himself it was a trivial incident not worth his time. But deep down, he had no idea that this encounter would alter the course of his life. Chapter 2. The event leading to marriage. That night, the grand chandelier lights of the Grand Royal Hotel's vast hall illuminated every corner, where the annual charity gala was in full swing. It was an event that drew the elite, those willing to spend lavishly to buy a reputation for benevolence. Emily Parker stood tucked away in a corner, her hands gripping an empty tray tightly, her eyes scanning the extravagant crowd. She didn't belong here. The simple black dress she'd borrowed from a friend looked out of place among the dazzling gowns worth thousands of dollars. But Emily wasn't there to show off. She was there for Ethan. The hospital treating her brother was hosting this fundraiser, and she'd volunteered to serve in hopes of securing donations from the wealthy guests. Every penny she could scrape together meant another day of life for the boy she loved most. A few meters away, Alexander King stood encircled by businessmen and reporters, his fitted black suit accentuating his tall frame and icy demeanor. He wasn't there out of compassion, but out of the social obligations his family imposed. His grandfather, Henry King, a gaunt yet commanding figure with silver hair, sat at the table of honor, his sharp eyes tracking his grandson's every move. Henry had made it clear at dinner the previous week, "Alexander, I don't have much time left. You need to marry a decent girl before I close my eyes." To Alexander, those words were just another burden. He didn't believe in love, let alone want to be shackled by an arranged marriage. The night passed with forced laughter and hollow toasts until an unexpected mishap shattered the calm. A decorative candle on one of the tables tipped over in a gust of wind, its small flame licking the tablecloth, and within moments a corner of the hall erupted in smoke. Screams broke out as the panicked crowd shoved their way toward the exits. Emily, who'd been carrying a tray of water nearby, quickly set it down and rushed forward, using her jacket to smother the flames before the hotel staff could react. Her swift action drew a few glances, but she paid no mind. She only wanted the event to continue so she could pursue her goal. Alexander, standing not far off, furrowed his brow as he watched the scene. He recognized the petite girl wrestling with the fire, the same one who'd spilled coffee on him the day before. But he didn't have time to dwell on it, because in the chaos, the heirloom ring he wore on his left hand, a solid gold piece engraved with the King family's eagle emblem, slipped off and rolled across the floor. He bent to search for it, but the surging crowd pushed him away. Emily, after extinguishing the fire, collapsed onto the floor, panting to catch her breath. As she lowered her head, her eyes caught a glint among the singed tablecloths. It was the ring, intricate, weighty, clearly no ordinary trinket. She picked it up, intending to find its owner, when an aged but authoritative voice sounded behind her. "Young lady, what are you holding?" She turned to face Henry King. He leaned on his cane, his piercing eyes fixed on the ring in her hand. Before Emily could explain, Henry tilted his head and, to her surprise, broke into a rare smile. "The King family ring. So this is fate's design," his voice boomed, drawing the attention of those nearby. Emily blinked in confusion, still processing, when Henry turned to Alexander, who had just returned after calming the crowd. "Alexander, I didn't expect you to announce your fiancé like this." Alexander froze, his gaze shifting from his grandfather to Emily, then landing on the ring in her grasp. He instantly grasped the misunderstanding, but before he could object, Henry raised his cane and declared with unwavering authority, "Everyone, congratulate my grandson and this young lady, his fiancée. The family ring in her hand is the clearest proof." The crowd erupted in applause, a few camera lenses swiveling toward them. Emily stood rooted to the spot, her trembling hands clutching the ring, her voice faltering. "No, sir, you've got it wrong. I just found it." But Alexander, under the weight of his grandfather's gaze and the dozens of eyes now fixed on them, felt cornered. Denying it now would humiliate Henry, a misstep an heir like him couldn't afford. He stepped forward, his icy stare locking onto Emily as if warning her to stay silent. Then he turned to the crowd, his voice low but commanding. "Very well, she's my bride-to-be." The words cut through the air like a blade, cold and devoid of emotion. Emily stood stunned, her heart pounding. She tried to protest, her voice shaking. "No, I'm not. What are you saying?" But Alexander's gaze, an impenetrable wall of ice, silenced her. He leaned in, whispering just for her ears. "Quiet, unless you want this to get worse." The threat in his tone sent a chill down her spine. She wanted to scream, to flee the room, but her feet felt nailed to the floor. Henry clapped with satisfaction, pulling Emily and Alexander closer for photos. He took her hand, placed the ring in Alexander's palm, and ordered, "Put it on her, as our tradition demands." Alexander clenched his jaw, but couldn't defy his grandfather in front of everyone. He took Emily's hand, small and trembling, and slid the ring onto her ring finger. The cold metal against her skin felt like a stark reminder of the bizarre situation. The crowd cheered, but Emily felt suffocated. She looked at Alexander, hoping he'd say something to undo the mistake. But he only turned away, his eyes darkening with suppressed anger. To him, she was an unexpected disaster, a wrench in his perfect plans. To her, he was a nightmare barging into her already chaotic life. When the gala ended, Alexander pulled Emily to a secluded corner, his voice like ice. "Don't think this is real. I only did it to appease my grandfather. Know your place." Emily, though terrified, lifted her chin and shot back. "I don't want anything to do with you. But if you don't fix this, I will." He smirked, that familiar, mocking smile returning. "Go ahead and try, but don't say I didn't warn you." That misunderstanding, sparked by a ring she'd innocently picked up, had morphed into an unwilling reality. Emily didn't yet know that Alexander's decision, made in a moment of frustration, would drag her into an inescapable marriage and change them both forever. Chapter 3. The Reluctant Marriage. 2 days after the chaotic charity gala, Alexander King appeared at the door of Beanhaven Coffee Shop on a drizzly afternoon. The bell chimed as he stepped inside, his dark gray suit clinging damply to his frame, accentuating his tall stature and icy demeanor. Emily Parker, wiping down the counter after a long day, looked up and immediately frowned. His deep blue eyes met hers, devoid of emotion, but glinting with a resolve that put her on edge. The last customer slipped out quietly, leaving behind a stifling silence broken only by the patter of rain against the glass. "You," Alexander said, his voice low and commanding, "come here. We need to talk." Without waiting for a reply, he strode to a secluded corner behind the counter, motioning for her to follow. Emily tossed the rag onto the table and approached, her gaze sharp with defiance. "I won't beat around the bush," he said, hands in his pockets, exuding authority. "After the gala, my grandfather wants us to marry. Immediately. I'll cover your brother's hospital bills, all of them, if you agree." Emily let out a scoff, cutting him off before he could continue. "Marry you? Are you insane? You think you're some golden prize everyone's dying to snag?" she shouted in his face, her voice rough but laced with sarcasm. "I'm not a puppet for you and your grandfather to pull strings with. Get out of here now." Alexander's brow furrowed, his eyes darkening. "Are you sure? This is your only chance to save your brother." Emily stepped closer, jabbing a finger into his chest. "You think I can't survive without your money? Toss me onto the street, and I'll still live with a smile. Don't dream I'll bow to you." She turned to walk away, but Alexander said nothing more, simply leaving the shop, his tall figure vanishing into the rain. Emily thought that was the end of it. But the next morning, when she visited Ethan at the hospital, the head doctor summoned her to a private room. "Miss Parker," he said gravely, "Ethan's free surgery, funded by a charitable organization, has been postponed indefinitely. The funding was suddenly pulled. Without payment, we can't proceed." Emily stood frozen, tears welling up. "Postponed? But last week you said everything was set." The doctor sighed. "I'm sorry. The decision's out of our hands. She rushed home making desperate calls but found no solutions. That night she sat by Ethan's bedside watching him sleep with his pale face. And though her heart ached, she told herself, "I'll find a way. I always do." But the next morning Alexander returned to the shop. Emily, eyes red but resolute, glared as he stepped in and snapped, "What do you want now?" He pulled out a document, a contract funding Ethan's surgery, stamped with the King Enterprises seal. "Your brother gets the surgery free," he said coolly. "If you marry me, refuse, and he has no chance." Emily snatched the paper, skimming it, and realized he was behind it all. King Enterprises was the original sponsor, and he'd instructed the hospital to pressure her with the funding withdrawal threat. "You bastard!" she screamed, tears spilling from rage. "You'd use Ethan to force me?" Alexander didn't flinch. "Agree, and he lives. Refuse, and face the consequences." Emily wanted to punch him, but Ethan's image left her powerless. Finally, she hissed through gritted teeth, "Fine. I'll marry you, but I'll make you regret dragging me into this." He smirked. "Good. The wedding's in 3 days." 3 days later, the wedding took place in grand style at the Grand Royale's main hall, the same venue as the charity gala. Hundreds of elite guests, dazzling chandeliers, and a live orchestra played lavish symphonies. Henry King, beaming triumphantly, wanted the day to proclaim the family's continuity. Emily was forced into an extravagant wedding gown, a haute couture design from Paris, shimmering with pearls and delicate white tulle, hugging her frame like a work of art. She stood before the mirror, staring at herself in the alien dress, and gave a wry smile. "I look like a princess, but feel like a prisoner." Alexander, in a perfectly tailored black suit, slipped the heirloom ring onto her finger with an icy gaze. As the priest declared them husband and wife, she turned away but kept a forced smile for the crowd. After the ceremony, Alexander took her to his mansion, a sprawling estate atop a hill, surrounded by pines and vast glass windows overlooking the city. Inside, everything was cold and opulent. Polished wood floors, minimalist furniture, an atmosphere like an icy palace. "Your room's on the second floor," he said evenly, not glancing at her. "I'm rarely here, so make yourself at home. But don't touch my things." Then he walked off, leaving Emily standing in the cavernous foyer, clutching her old canvas bag. Trapped in this marriage, Emily refused to sink into despair. She was tough, optimistic, always finding joy no matter the circumstances. On her first day, she explored the mansion and stumbled upon a neglected garden in the backyard, wildflowers and overgrown shrubs. She laughed aloud. "Looks like me, tossed aside but still thriving." She began tending it, weeding, watering, pruning. One evening, as golden sunlight filtered through the trees, she sat in the garden, softly singing an old folk song her mother once hummed, a radiant smile on her lips. Unbeknownst to her, Alexander watched from an upstairs window. He'd returned early unexpectedly, and the sight of her, small, vibrant amid the garden, made his heart skip. An illusion, he told himself, brushing off the feeling and retreating to his study. In the days that followed, their hostility didn't wane. Emily avoided speaking to him, maintaining her steely resolve, but she still found joy for herself. She claimed a corner of the kitchen as her territory, cooking simple dishes like toast or tomato soup, humming as she worked. One late night, Alexander came home and heard her singing from the kitchen. He paused, hidden behind the door, watching her sway to her own made-up tune. Her voice was clear and lively, a stark contrast to the house's chill. He shook his head, muttering, "She's just a tool," and headed upstairs. But then something unexpected happened. It was Emily's birthday, a day she hadn't told anyone about, only noting it in her small journal. Alexander, on a rare errand to buy flowers for a business partner, impulsively chose a bouquet of pristine white roses because they suit the house. Back at the mansion, he saw Emily watering the garden, and for reasons he couldn't fathom, left the flowers on the kitchen table with a note, "For you." When Emily came inside, she stared at the bouquet in disbelief, then burst out laughing. Who'd have thought that jerk could buy flowers? She arranged them in a vase, setting it in the garden, and though she didn't thank him, her heart warmed slightly. Emily began to see that Alexander wasn't entirely heartless. One morning visiting Ethan, she learned his surgery had gone ahead, as promised. The doctor said, "The charity reinstated funding." She knew it was King Enterprises. Another time she dropped a glass in the kitchen, and Alexander appeared out of nowhere, silently picking up the shards. She smirked. "Didn't think you'd stoop to picking things up." But he turned away before she could say more. The distance between them remained a stone wall, but tiny sparks began to flicker, though neither would admit it. Chapter 4. Harsh Words. 3 months after the wedding, life in Alexander King's mansion was no longer just a string of cold silences as it had been at the start. Emily Parker, with her resilient optimism and fiery spirit, had made the house a place she could endure. The small garden now bloomed with wildflowers, the kitchen carried the scent of toasted bread, and her singing occasionally echoed through the vast space. Though her relationship with Alexander remained that of strangers, no greetings, no glances, she refused to let herself sink into gloom. For her, whether cast onto the streets or into a lavish mansion, she'd still find a way to live joyfully. A small shift began with Emily's cooking habits. She didn't intentionally cook for Alexander. He never asked, and she had no desire to. But whenever leftovers piled up, she'd leave them out. "Might as well, since I'm at it," she'd tell herself, setting the extra portion on the kitchen table without a word. The first time, it was a plate of spaghetti with rich tomato sauce, topped with melted golden cheese. Alexander, coming home late after a long day, eyed the dish with a frown, but sat down to eat out of hunger. He hadn't expected it to be so good. The flavors bold, yet balanced, far from the restaurant meals he was used to. He finished it but said nothing, quietly washing the plate before heading upstairs. Over time, this became an unspoken routine. Emily whipped up simple yet delicious dishes, sweet pumpkin soup, crispy potato pancakes, or honey-glazed roasted chicken. She never offered them to him, just left the extras on the table as if by chance. At first, Alexander ate reluctantly, telling himself, "It's just leftovers, waste not." But soon he started coming home on time, especially on nights she tended to cook. One evening, he returned late to an empty table. She hadn't cooked, and he paced near the kitchen, glancing around as if checking, before heading upstairs with an odd, unexplained irritation. Alexander responded in his own subtle ways, though he masked them well. Occasionally he'd bring home fruit, a bag of sweet oranges, a few ripe pears, and set them on the table, gruffly saying, "Bought them for a client, grabbed extra." Emily smirked, knowing he didn't need to explain, but took them anyway, sometimes teasing, "Your clients must really love oranges, huh?" Every so often, he'd bring a small bouquet, pink carnations or white daisies, repeating the same excuse. For a client, picked up extra. She'd arrange them in a vase, place it in the garden, and chuckle to herself, "This guy really can't just say the truth." Still, their relationship remained like parallel lines. They barely spoke beyond curt exchanges, never held eye contact for more than a few seconds. To Emily, he was still the man who'd forced her into this marriage. To Alexander, she was a duty he had to tolerate. Yet those small moments, the plate of spaghetti he finished, the flowers she displayed, quietly planted seeds of a bond neither acknowledged. That evening, a lavish dinner party was held at the private residence of a major King Enterprises partner. Alexander had to attend, and since Henry King wanted his granddaughter-in-law present to bolster the family image, Emily was dragged along. She wore an emerald green evening gown, a gift from Henry, that hugged her figure, highlighting her radiant beauty. Stepping into the chandelier-lit hall, she forced a smile, telling herself, "Just pretend it's a free theater show." Alexander, in a flawless black suit, walked beside her but said nothing, his gaze as cold as ever. The party buzzed with fake laughter and polite chatter. Emily lingered near the buffet, holding a glass of orange juice, observing the crowd. She wasn't used to this atmosphere, but stayed upbeat. "At least the food's good." Her eyes drifted to Alexander, standing amid a group of friends, wealthy men in expensive suits, laughing casually. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but a breeze from an open window carried Alexander's voice to her clearly. He stood with his back to her, a glass of red wine in hand. A tall, blonde friend, voice slurring with drink, slapped his shoulder and guffawed. "Hey, Alex, where's that reluctant wife of yours? Heard you married her 'cause your granddad forced you, right?" Alexander smirked, that mocking smile surfacing. He took a sip of wine and replied, his voice low but sharp as a blade. "She thinks she's worthy of me just because we've lived together a few days? A lowly girl like her could never step into my world. This is just a charade to keep my grandfather happy." The words hit Emily like a dagger to the chest. The glass of orange juice trembled in her hand, a few drops splashing onto the floor. Lowly, could never step into my world. The phrases echoed in her mind, tearing through the optimism she'd built over the past 3 months. She'd endured him for Ethan, tried to find joy in this house, even cooked for him without meaning to. But to him she was a joke, a cheap thing to mock in front of his friends. Emily quietly set the glass on the table, her hands clenching to hold back tears. She turned and hurried out of the hall, unwilling to let anyone see her break. Outside, the night was cold, the wind rustling her thin dress. She stood under a large oak, tears finally spilling in silent streams. She told herself, "I'm not trash for him to trample. I'm worth more than this." Her pride, the one thing she'd clung to despite life's beatings, was now crushed by the man she was forced to call her husband. Alexander didn't know she'd overheard. He kept chatting with his friends, but when he turned to find her to leave, she was gone. A staff member said Mrs. King had stepped out long ago. He frowned, a flicker of unease passing through him, but he brushed it off. Back at the mansion, he found the garden empty. No singing, no sign of her. He went to the second floor, knocked on her door, and got no reply. Opening it, he saw the room bare except for her old canvas bag on the bed, a sign she'd left. In the days that followed, Emily avoided him entirely. She stayed in the mansion, for Ethan's sake, but made sure their paths never crossed. She locked herself in her room, only emerging when he was gone. The kitchen table held no more leftovers. The garden went untended. Her singing vanished. Alexander began to feel a strange emptiness. He'd grown used to the smell of her cooking, the flowers she placed in the garden. One day he came home early, passing the kitchen to see if she'd cooked, but found only silence. The breaking point came one evening when Alexander returned early and saw Emily watering the garden, the first time she'd appeared in days. He approached, his tone harsh. "What are you doing? What's with hiding from me like this?" Emily turned, eyes red but blazing. She threw the watering can to the ground and shouted, "Hiding? You think I want to be near you? After what you said at that party?" Alexander froze. "What party? What nonsense are you spouting?" Emily stepped forward, jabbing a finger into his chest, her voice trembling with fury. "Don't play dumb. I heard it all. A lowly girl who could never step into your world. That's what you said, right? You think I'm trash to laugh at with your friends?" Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe them away, staring at him with hurt and hatred. Alexander remembered, but instead of apologizing, his anger flared. "So what?" he snapped. "Who do you think you are to demand my care? You're just part of a deal. Don't forget that." His words, cold and cruel, poured fuel on the fire. Emily broke into sobs, screaming, "A deal? Then I'm done playing. I'd rather live on the streets than endure you." She stormed inside, leaving Alexander standing there, his gaze darkening with anger and an unease he couldn't name. Chapter 5. Regret. The night after their fierce argument, Alexander King's mansion was shrouded in darkness and a deathly stillness. Heavy rain poured outside, each drop pounding against the glass windows, mirroring the turmoil in Emily Parker's heart. She sat on the bed in her second-floor room, clutching her worn canvas bag, the last remnant of her free life before being dragged into this reluctant marriage. Tears had dried on her cheeks, leaving faint streaks, but her eyes still burned with resilience. Alexander's words, "Who do you think you are to demand my care?" echoed in her mind, the final blow that severed the fragile hope she'd once held. Emily wasn't one to break easily. She'd survived hungry days, laughed through life's beatings, but this time, her pride had been trampled beyond endurance. She couldn't stay here a second longer. Not for money, not for Ethan, but for herself. She stood, grabbed a sheet from her small notebook, and scribbled a few shaky lines. I don't want to be a burden to you anymore. Goodbye. She left the note on the table, zipped her bag, and stepped out of the room. The darkness swallowed her small figure as she left the mansion, carrying her pain and a resolve not to look back. Alexander returned home early the next morning after a long night at the office. Trying to smother the anger and unease he refused to face, he stepped into the grand foyer, shedding his wet coat and hanging it up, expecting the familiar scent of food from the kitchen or Emily's soft singing, things he'd grown accustomed to without realizing. But today, there was nothing. The house was empty, colder than ever, as if its soul had been stripped away. He frowned, walking to the kitchen, but the table was bare, spotless. No plate of spaghetti, no potato pancakes, no sign of her. He climbed to the second floor and knocked on her door, his voice curt. Emily, are you in there? No response. He pushed the door open, and the sight stopped him cold. The room was empty, the bed neatly made, the wardrobe ajar, no trace of her presence. On the table, a small note lay alone, a silent accusation. He picked it up, reading the brief words. I don't want to be a burden to you anymore. Goodbye. His hands trembled, the paper slipping to the floor, and for the first time in his life, Alexander felt a gaping void tear open in his chest. He rushed to the garden, where she'd once sat singing, tending wildflowers. But she wasn't there. The white daisies he'd conveniently bought last week still stood, their petals wilted, mocking his indifference. He returned to the kitchen, spotting the apron she often wore, a tattered thing with burn marks from her cooking. He picked it up, fingers gripping the rough fabric, and memories flooded him like an unstoppable tide. He remembered her smile in the garden, radiant under the soft golden sunlight, as she caressed wildflower petals like they were treasures. He recalled her quiet singing in the kitchen, clear and warm, filling the late nights when he'd pause to listen. He thought of the pumpkin soup she'd left out, how he'd eaten it reluctantly at first but soon came to anticipate it daily. He remembered the times he'd placed fruit or flowers on the table, lying about buying extra, just to see her smirk and arrange them in a vase. Those trivial moments he'd dismissed, telling himself they meant nothing. Now, with her gone, they stabbed into him like knives. What have I done to her? He asked himself, his voice hoarse in his mind. He sank onto the sofa, still clutching the apron, and for the first time, he faced the emptiness he'd created. This house, once his fortress of perfect solitude, was now a hollow shell. No singing, no scent of food, no small but fierce presence of Emily. He'd grown used to her, needed her, but his pride had blinded him to it all. He stood and stepped onto the balcony, gazing at the city lights below. The cold wind blew through, but he felt nothing but the dull ache in his heart. He replayed the cruel words he'd spoken at the party. A lowly girl like her could never step into my world. And now they turned back to torment him. He'd been wrong. She wasn't lowly. She was the only one who'd brought light into his frigid world, and he'd extinguished it himself. He berated himself. How could I be so stupid? Why didn't I see it sooner? The depths of Alexander's soul began to surface as he sat back on the sofa, head in his hands. He remembered their first meeting when she'd spilled coffee on him and argued back fearlessly. He recalled how she'd stood up for Ethan, agreeing to marry him despite her deep hatred. He thought of her defiant gaze in their last fight, when she'd screamed she'd rather live on the streets than endure him. She wasn't weak. She was stronger than him, and he'd been too arrogant to see it. He rose, fumbling for his phone to call her, only to realize he didn't have her number. He raced back to her room, rifling through drawers for a clue. Nothing but a few scraps of paper with recipes she jotted down. He picked one up, reading her scrawled note. Pumpkin soup. Add a bit of cream for extra flavor. And tears fell unbidden. For the first time, Alexander King, the man who hadn't cried since his parents' death, felt utterly pathetic. His pride crumbled entirely. He realized he loved Emily, not just now, but from those small moments he'd denied, when he'd lingered to hear her sing, when he'd finished her spaghetti, when he'd bought flowers just to see her smile. But he'd realized it too late. The fear of losing her forever overwhelmed him, a wave drowning his reason. He wondered, where did she go? Is she okay? He couldn't bear the thought of her out there, alone, while he sat here with belated regret. Alexander bolted to his car, heedless of the rain, determined to find her. He didn't know where to start, the coffee shop, the hospital, anywhere she'd mentioned, but he couldn't stay still. He told himself, I have to find her. I have to make this right. Her note lay on the passenger seat, a reminder of what he'd lost. He drove into the night, heart heavy with remorse, in a faint hope he could still redeem himself. Meanwhile, Emily sat in a cheap motel near the hospital, clutching her bag, watching the rain through the window. She no longer cried. She'd resolved to keep living, as she always had. But deep inside, the pain still smoldered. She didn't know that the man who'd hurt her was now desperately searching for her, his heart opening to love for the first time. Chapter 6. The Journey to Reclaim. Love. Rain poured relentlessly as Alexander King drove through the dark streets, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, his heart weighed down by regret and desperation. Emily's note lay on the passenger seat, its brief words a constant accusation echoing in his mind. I don't want to be a burden to you anymore. Goodbye. He couldn't stay in the empty mansion a moment longer. He'd searched the city for her, Bean Haven coffee shop, the hospital where Ethan was treated, the narrow alleys she'd once mentioned in passing, but found no trace. After 3 sleepless, foodless days, a small detail surfaced in his memory. Emily's hometown, a place over 100 kilometers away where she'd said she grew up with Ethan. It was his last hope. He drove through the night, arriving at dawn, and pulled up outside a roadside diner called Mama's Kitchen. Through the fog glass, he saw her, Emily in a green apron, wiping tables with a faint smile. She was thinner, her eyes tired, but still carried the resilience he'd come to know. He sat in the car, heart pounding, hesitant to step inside. She was trying to start over, and he knew he'd driven her here. But he couldn't leave without facing her, not after what he'd done. Alexander stepped out, his suit wrinkled, hair disheveled, face haggard from days of neglect. He pushed open the diner door, the small bell chiming, and Emily looked up. Her expression hardened as she saw him, the smile vanishing. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped out from behind the counter, her voice icy. What are you doing here? He didn't answer immediately, just looked at her, his deep blue eyes now filled with pain and remorse. Then, to the shock of the few patrons inside, he dropped to his knees on the worn wooden floor, head bowed. Emily, I was wrong. I don't deserve you, but I can't live without you. I'm sorry for everything I said, everything I did. I'm a bastard, and I know it. Please give me a chance to make it right. Emily stood frozen, her hands clenching into fists. The sting of his harsh words, a lowly girl like her could never step into my world, still lingered, an unhealed wound. She looked at him kneeling, broken and desperate. But instead of softening, she felt only emptiness. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling but resolute. You were right. We're from 2 different worlds. Go back to yours. I don't belong there. Her words sliced through the air, cold and unyielding. She turned and walked into the kitchen, leaving him on his knees, head bowed in silence. But Alexander didn't stand and leave as she'd expected. He stayed there a few seconds longer, then rose, his gaze more determined than ever. He knew words weren't enough. He'd hurt her too deeply, and she had every right to push him away. But he couldn't give up, not after realizing how much he loved her. He rented a small room at a nearby motel, resolved to stay in the town. If she wouldn't forgive him, he'd prove with actions that he was no longer the arrogant man who'd wounded her. The next day he returned to the diner, not to apologize again, but to help. Dressed in a simple shirt instead of a suit, sleeves rolled up, he offered to work for free, washing dishes, wiping tables, unloading deliveries. Emily eyed him suspiciously, her tone frigid. What are you doing? I told you to leave. He replied, soft but firm. I'm not going. I'll be here, whether you want me to or not. She shrugged and turned away, assuming he'd quit after a few days. But he didn't. He worked quietly, never complaining, though his hands, once accustomed only to keyboards, turned raw from dish soap. Meanwhile, another man entered Emily's life. Tom, a kind-hearted mechanic from the town. Tall, with tousled brown hair, he had a warm smile and sincere eyes. Tom frequented the diner, chatting with Emily, bringing small gifts, a basket of apples from his garden, a cake he'd baked himself. He liked her and made no effort to hide it. One day he offered to fix up her family's old house, where she was staying temporarily, and said gently, "You don't need to go back to the city, Emily. You can start over here, I'll help you." Emily gave a faint smile, not committing, but Tom's care brought her comfort. Alexander watched it all from a distance. How Tom made her laugh, how he stood close while fixing a pipe in the diner. And for the first time, he felt a searing jealousy. He wasn't used to this. He'd always been in control, always the one pursued. But now he feared losing her for real, not out of pride, but to a man better than him, a man who hadn't hurt her. It forced him to confront his greatest challenge, proving his love, not just with words, but with deeds. He began to change, step by small step. One day when Emily fell ill from overwork, he stood in the rain to buy medicine, leaving it at her door with a note. "Take it, don't wear yourself out." He didn't go inside, didn't ask for thanks, just left quietly. Another time he saw her struggling to replant the backyard garden, once her mother's joy, and silently bought seeds and tools, helping her dig when she wasn't looking. When she noticed, she frowned. "What are you doing?" he answered. "I want to help, that's all." Emily kept her distance, but she couldn't deny his effort. She saw him fumble while washing dishes, watched him patiently learn to peel potatoes from the diner's owner, observed him sitting in the garden with muddy hands just to plant flowers. She started talking to him more, though only in short bursts. "You're peeling it wrong like this," or "Careful, don't let the water spill." Alexander didn't ask for more. Each word she spoke was a small victory. Tom noticed Alexander's presence and didn't like it. One day he confronted him outside the diner, voice stern. "What are you doing here? Emily doesn't need someone like you, someone who hurt her." Alexander bowed his head. "I know I was wrong, but I won't give up. If she chooses you, I'll accept it. But I have to make things right first." Tom didn't trust him, but didn't force Emily to choose yet. He stayed by her side, a steady support, pushing Alexander to try harder. Healing came slowly through small moments. One evening, after the diner closed, Emily found Alexander sitting in the garden, gazing at the flowers he'd planted. She approached, sat beside him, silent for a while before asking, "Why don't you leave? I told you I don't belong in your world." Alexander turned to her, his eyes earnest. "I used to think my world was everything, but I was wrong. My world means nothing without you. I'll stay here, whether you forgive me or not, because you're the world I want to belong to." Emily didn't reply, but she didn't walk away. She looked at him, haggard, sincere, no longer the arrogant Alexander King, and for the first time, she felt a spark of hope. The pain lingered, but his persistence stirred her. She said quietly, "I haven't forgiven you, but I'll see what you do next." It wasn't a promise, but for Alexander, it was all he needed. In the days that followed, he stayed, working alongside her, learning to live simply as she did. He was no longer the cold CEO, but a man striving to reclaim the love he'd lost. Tom remained a challenge, but Alexander wasn't afraid anymore. He knew this journey would be long, but he was ready, because for the first time, he understood the value of what he was fighting to hold on to. Emily. Chapter 7. Proving Through Actions. The days in Emily's small hometown passed with Alexander King's quiet persistence. He'd stayed over a month, working at Mama's kitchen alongside her, learning to live simply to prove he was no longer the arrogant man who'd hurt her. Emily kept her distance, her gaze cool but no longer as harsh. She'd said, "I haven't forgiven you, but I'll see what you do next." And Alexander clung to those words like a fragile thread of hope. He didn't ask for more. Every day near her, even with just brief exchanges or fleeting glances, was a small step forward. But fate didn't let things unfold smoothly. One stormy night, the town's sky darkened, thunder cracked across the air, and fierce winds rattled the old rooftops. Emily, as usual, worked late at the diner, helping the owner, Mrs. Lilly, clean up after the rush. She was exhausted. Endless workdays, unhealed pain, and the strain of caring for Ethan from afar had visibly worn her down. As she carried a tray of dishes down the narrow back staircase, her foot slipped on a wet wooden step. A brief scream escaped her, blending with the rain, before she tumbled down, collapsing unconscious amid shattered glass. Mrs. Lilly found her motionless at the bottom of the stairs, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. Panicked, she called Alexander, who was at his motel a few kilometers away. "Come quick! Emily fell. It's bad!" Her voice trembled over the phone. Alexander shot out of bed, not bothering with a coat, and raced to his car in the storm. The streets were flooded, visibility near zero, but he didn't care. He floored the gas, heart pounding, with one thought: I can't lose her. I can't. He drove through the night, tires skidding on slick roads, nearly veering into ditches. Rain lashed the windshield, thunder roared, but he didn't stop. When he reached the local hospital, he was drenched, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes red with strain. He burst into the ER, finding Emily on a bed, head bandaged, eyes closed. The doctor said she had a mild concussion and blood loss, but would recover with timely care. Alexander stood by her side, trembling hands grasping hers, cold and frail. He knelt, pulling her into his arms, whispering through ragged breaths, "I won't lose you again, I swear." Tom, alerted by Mrs. Lilly, arrived soon after. He stood at the door, watching Alexander hold Emily, his eyes darkening with jealousy and worry. But he didn't enter, turning away silently, leaving Alexander with her. That night, Alexander never left her room. He sat by her bed, holding her hand, changing her bandages when she spiked a fever, wiping sweat from her brow with a warm cloth. When she woke the next morning, her weary eyes met his, haggard, soaked, but unwavering. She murmured weakly, "You? Why are you here?" He rasped, "Because I can't be anywhere else." Emily said nothing more, but she didn't pull her hand away. She looked at him, the man who'd once hurt her deeply, and for the first time saw a different Alexander. Not arrogant, not cold, just a man terrified of losing her. The pain lingered, though, and she stayed silent, unwilling to let her heart open too soon. Alexander's true sacrifice came shortly after. While she was still hospitalized, his assistant called. A multi-million-dollar deal with an international conglomerate awaited his signature back in the city. It was a project he'd pursued for 6 months, a game-changer for King Enterprises. The assistant pressed, "Mr. King, you need to return today or they'll cancel." Alexander glanced at Emily, asleep on the hospital bed, and didn't hesitate. He hung up, texting back, "Cancel the meeting." "I'm not going." He abandoned the deal, his lavish world, to stay in the small town and care for her. Emily woke that afternoon, finding him still there, holding a cold coffee. She asked softly, "You're not going back to the company? I heard you on the phone." Alexander met her gaze, earnest. "The company doesn't matter. You do. I lost you once. I won't lose you again." His words shook her, not for their grandeur, but their honesty. She knew what a deal like that meant to him, and his choice to forsake it for her was unthinkable. Yet she held back, her tone cool. "Don't say things like that. I haven't forgotten what you did." Alexander didn't falter. After her discharge, he stayed in town, tending to her every need. He learned to live as she did, simply, sincerely, starting with small acts to bridge their gap. One day, seeing her cook soup in the motel kitchen, he didn't just watch as before. He stepped in, clumsily grabbing a knife. "Teach me to peel potatoes." Emily frowned but smirked. "You cook?" "Good luck." She stood beside him, guiding his grip, and though he mangled the potato, she didn't shoo him away. That soup tasted better than usual, despite his minor contribution. He returned to her backyard garden, where he'd once helped her plant flowers. One afternoon, he brought a bag of daisy seeds, her favorite, and they dug together, planting each one. His hands were muddy, shirt sweat-soaked, but he smiled, a rare grin free of arrogance. Emily sat beside him, watching, and for the first time didn't turn away. She asked, "Why do you like planting flowers?" he replied. Because you do. I want to see you smile like you did at the mansion. His words silenced her, but her gaze softened slightly. In the days that followed, he kept up the small gestures. He brought her hot tea when she worked late, fixed a window loosened by the wind, even learned to bake bread from Mrs. Lily to surprise her. One morning, he set a charred loaf on the table, sheepish. It's not as good as yours, but try it. Emily eyed it, burst out laughing, her first genuine laugh in his presence, and said, You're hopeless. But she ate it, her small bites making his efforts feel worthwhile. Emily began to soften, though she wouldn't admit it. She saw him change, not just in words, but in every sincere act. He wasn't the cold, proud Alexander King anymore. He was a man ready to give up everything for her. Yet fear of being hurt again kept her guarded. One evening, as they sat in the garden, she murmured, I don't know if I can trust you again. You hurt me too much. Alexander took her hand, gentle but firm. I know. I don't expect forgiveness now, but I'll wait, however long it takes. Tom, still quietly caring for Emily, noticed Alexander's shift. He stopped confronting him harshly but stayed close, a steady presence she could lean on. One day he asked, Do you still love him, Emily? She didn't answer right away, gazing at the garden where Alexander worked. She said, I don't know, but I'm finding out. Tom nodded, stepping back to let her choose. The distance between Emily and Alexander narrowed, not through grand promises, but through small, honest moments. She hadn't fully forgiven him, but she no longer pushed him away. For Alexander, every smile she gave, every word she spared, was a light guiding him through the darkness he'd created. He knew this journey wasn't over, but he wouldn't stop, because she was everything he wanted to hold on to. Chapter 8. Affirming Love. After months of steadfast effort in the small town, Alexander King had proven his love through every sincere action. Emily Parker, once guarded by her fear of being hurt again, could no longer deny that her heart had opened to him. Their relationship was no longer two parallel lines but had woven into a bond, crafted from sacrifice and growing trust. The chance for Alexander to affirm his love came at a second charity gala at the Grand Royal, the very place where it all began with the heirloom ring. This time, it wasn't Henry King forcing them. Alexander willingly brought Emily along, a way to mend the past. She wore a simple yet elegant emerald green dress, chosen herself rather than a lavish gift from his grandfather. As they entered the chandelier-lit hall, Emily held his hand lightly, her eyes flickering with unease but softer than before. The gala buzzed with laughter and toasts. Alexander, in a fitted black suit, stood amid the crowd, but his gaze never strayed from Emily, who lingered in a corner with a glass of orange juice. He knew this was his moment, not to prove anything to the world but to her. When the organizers invited him to speak as the event's main sponsor, he stepped onto the stage, took the microphone, and paused to gather his courage. Ladies and gentlemen, his deep voice resonated, commanding the room. I was once a fool, arrogant and blind to what truly mattered. I hurt the person I love most, the one who brought light into my cold world. He stopped, locking eyes with Emily, his deep blue gaze brimming with emotion. Emily, you are everything to me. I was wrong to push you away. But today, in front of everyone, I want to say I love you, not because of pressure, not because of a deal, but from my heart. He stepped off the stage, walking toward her, and to the crowd's astonishment, knelt before her, pulling a simple silver ring from his pocket. Not the heirloom, but one he'd chosen himself. Emily Parker, I don't deserve you, but I want to spend my life making it up to you. Will you marry me again, this time for love? His voice cracked, trembling with feeling. Emily stood frozen, the glass of orange juice shaking in her hand. Tears welled up, not from pain, but from the sincerity in his words. She recalled the days he'd knelt to apologize at the diner, the nights he'd driven through storms to save her, the times he'd clumsily peeled potatoes or planted flowers with her. It all flashed before her like a film, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She set the glass down, stepped forward, and before hundreds of eyes wrapped her arms around him, tears soaking his shoulder. Yes, she whispered, voice choked. I'll marry you. The crowd erupted in applause, but for them, the world shrank to just the two of them. Alexander held her tightly, murmuring, "Thank you for giving me a chance." Emily smiled through her tears, feeling safe in his embrace. A month later, they held a true wedding, nothing lavish but warm and simple in the backyard garden of Emily's hometown house. The wildflowers they'd planted together bloomed vibrantly under the sun, the tables set modestly with homemade bread and soup. Only a few close guests attended. Mrs. Lilly, Tom, who smiled with his blessing despite a pang of sadness, and Henry King, who sat on a wooden chair with a satisfied grin. When the priest declared them husband and wife, Henry stood leaning on his cane and said, "I picked the right one after all. My granddaughter-in-law is a treasure, and you've finally seen it, Alexander." He bowed to the old man, holding Emily's hand, his eyes full of gratitude. Life after marriage wasn't just sweet days, but a partnership through challenges. Emily returned to the city with Alexander, but kept working at Bean Haven. He helped her care for Ethan, arranging top doctors through King Enterprises. After months of treatment, Ethan fully recovered, his smile their greatest joy. A year later, a baby boy was born, with Alexander's blue eyes and Emily's radiant smile. They named him Liam, a symbol of a new beginning and a love that had triumphed over trials. Alexander matured immensely through his journey. He shed his arrogance, no longer the cold CEO obsessed with prestige. He became an exemplary husband, brewing coffee for Emily each morning, reading to Liam at night. He still ran King Enterprises but prioritized family, even planting flowers in the mansion's yard to make her happy. Emily, with her resilient optimism and grit, kept working at the coffee